Open on the wreckage, picture a city after a disaster. Streets that used to be full of life. People walking past each other without making eye contact. Buildings that look the same but feel completely hollow inside. Everything still functions, technically, but something fundamental has broken. That is a pretty accurate description of modern Western dating. And today I'm going to make the case, calmly, with evidence, and without pretending this is simple, that we are living through a kind of social collapse that nobody officially declared, nobody voted for, and almost nobody in a position of authority wants to name out loud. The Western dating market has split into two parallel realities, and the split is more extreme than most people dare to admit. The 80-20 hypothesis, and why it's not a conspiracy theory, the core claim goes like this. Roughly 80% of men in the modern Western dating market are, for all practical purposes, invisible. Not to their friends, not to their colleagues, but to women on the open dating market. They are not rejected. They are not seen at all. They exist in a grey zone of complete non-consideration. Meanwhile, the top 20% of men, defined by a combination of looks, height, social status, confidence, and increasingly digital presentation, circulate through a dating pool that contains 80% of available women. Two entirely different social realities, running simultaneously, in the same cities, in the same apps at the same time. The market didn't fail for everyone. For a minority of men, it has never been better. For the majority, it has quietly ceased to exist. Now, before anyone reaches for the easy dismissals, incel rhetoric, cope, just go to the gym, I want to walk through this carefully. Because the data is real, the mechanisms are identifiable, and the consequences are showing up in places that can no longer be ignored. What the numbers actually show. Let's start with dating app data, because apps are the primary venue for modern dating, particularly for people under 35 in urban environments. Studies of major platforms consistently show extreme asymmetry in male versus female matching behavior. Research published on app usage patterns has found that the bottom 78% of men are competing for the bottom 22% of women, while the top men receive a disproportionate volume of matches. In some analyses, the top 1% of male profiles receive more likes than the bottom 50% combined. Men swipe right, indicating interest, at rates of roughly 60–70% of profiles. Women swipe right at roughly 4–14% depending on the platform. What this means in practice is that women operate with extreme selectivity, while most men operate with near indiscriminate openness and receive almost nothing in return. A 2021 Pew Research study found that 57% of men on dating apps described their experience as negative. More pointedly, a growing body of sociological research shows that young men in Western countries are reporting fewer sexual partners, less romantic activity, and higher rates of involuntary celibacy than any comparable generation measured since the sexual revolution of the 1960s. This is not a fringe phenomenon. It is a statistically measurable, peer-reviewed, documented reality.
How the apps engineered the split. The parallel dating realities didn't emerge from thin air. They were, in large part, engineered, not necessarily with malicious intent, but as an almost inevitable consequence of how these platforms are designed. Dating apps are not matchmaking services, they are attention extraction machines. Their revenue model depends not on successful relationships, which would logically reduce usage, but on engagement, subscription renewals, and the addictive loop of hope and disappointment. They are structurally more aligned with slot machines than with marriage bureaus, and slot machines work by giving intermittent reward to keep you pulling the lever. For men, the lever is the swipe. The intermittent reward is the occasional match. For the 80% of men who receive almost no matches, the experience creates a peculiar psychological trap. Enough hope to stay, not enough success to actually move forward. The app wants you exactly there, in the waiting room, paying the monthly fee. Meanwhile, the top 20% of men exist in an entirely different environment. They have more options than they can manage. This abundance paradox creates its own dysfunction. Difficulty committing, perpetual optimization for someone better, emotional unavailability. The wasteland is bad for the invisible majority. But the parallel life isn't entirely healthy for those inside it either. What this does to people, when a person is systematically invisible in a domain that matters deeply to human identity, romantic desirability, the psychological consequences are not trivial. We are a pair-bonding species. The desire for romantic connection is not a preference, like enjoying a particular music genre. It is a fundamental component of human well-being, as well documented as the need for food, shelter, and social belonging.
For the 80% of men who are systematically excluded from meaningful participation in the modern dating market, the experience tends to produce one of several responses. Some internalize, developing a pervasive sense of worthlessness that bleeds into other areas of life, affecting work, friendship, and self-perception. Some externalize, directing resentment toward women, toward the system, toward what they perceive as rigged rules. This is the pathway that eventually produces the darker corners of the online manosphere. Some go numb, they disengage. They build lives around productivity, gaming, fitness, or solitude, not as a chosen philosophy, but as a kind of emotional withdrawal in response to a market that has told them, repeatedly and clearly, that they are not wanted. None of these outcomes are good, and blaming the individuals who fall into them, rather than examining the conditions that produce them, is a failure of social analysis. The non-player character problem. Now I want to use a term that's become common in this space, and examine it honestly rather than dismiss it or uncritically celebrate it. The word is NPC. Non-player character. A person who moves through social space following a script, reacting to stimuli, but not fully present as an individual agent.
The argument made in certain circles is that a significant portion of people, men and women, are functionally NPCs in the dating market. They are not making genuine considered choices. They are running on heuristics, unconscious, automated rules built by social conditioning, algorithmic feedback loops, and cultural programming, without ever examining the actual results those rules are producing. For men, the NPC mode often looks like approach, get rejected, feel shame, retreat, try the app, get no matches, feel worthless, repeat. No analysis, no adaptation, no stepping outside the system to ask whether the system itself is worth participating in. For women, the NPC mode often looks like chase the top 20%, maintain extremely high standards shaped partly by unrealistic media representations and partly by the unprecedented number of options the apps provide, experience a cycle of unavailable men and short-lived situationships, feel confused about why genuine connection is so elusive despite constant activity. The NPC critique is not about intelligence. Highly intelligent people run on autopilot in domains where autopilot feels safe. The question is whether consciousness, genuine reflection, can interrupt the loop. For most people, in the current environment, it doesn't.
So what does this analysis suggest, practically? I'll be honest, there are no clean solutions. But there are honest directions. The first is to recognize the terrain for what it is. The man who understands that the modern Western dating market is structurally tilted, and that this is not primarily a reflection of his personal inadequacy, is already in a better position than the man who has internalized invisibility as a verdict on his worth. The second is to step outside the primary venue. The apps are the most extreme expression of the 80-20 split because they reduce human beings to a rapid visual assessment with no context, no conversation, and no chemistry. In-person environments, communities, sports, hobbies, social circles are not immune to preference hierarchies, but they are far less algorithmically brutal. Personality, humor, reliability, and presence, things that cannot be conveyed in a photo, begin to matter again. The third, and this is the uncomfortable one, is that some men are consciously opting out of the Western dating market altogether. Through geomaxing, through genuine self-development that changes which market they're in, or through a philosophical redefinition of what a successful life looks like. Whether any of these is the right answer depends on the individual. But the awareness that the current market is one option, not the only option, is itself a kind of liberation.
Post-apocalyptic stories are not really about the disaster. They're about what people do in the aftermath. Who builds something, who descends into chaos, who finds a way to live with dignity in conditions that were not designed for dignity. The modern Western dating market is a post-apocalyptic landscape. The disaster was quiet. a slow accumulation of technological, cultural, and economic shifts that nobody declared and nobody voted on. The apps start the individualization of social life, the collapse of the organic third spaces, the church, the community club, the workplace romance, where people used to simply meet each other as human beings rather than as profiles. The 80% of men who are invisible in this landscape have two choices. They can stand in the ruins and resent the ruins, or they can recognize that the map has changed and decide, consciously, deliberately, how they want to navigate a world that was not built for them. The wasteland is real, but people have always built things worth having in wastelands. That has to count for something. I'll see you in the next one.